Here is a messy cord situation next to my son's bed that I want to solve by building a floating shelf with embedded USB ports. And this is a scrap piece of framing lumber that I want to use to do it. After chopping and ripping it to size, I'm running it through the planer to clean it up. I'm also running through another piece of scrap framing wood that I'm going to use to double up the edge of the shelf. This is the USB hub that I want to embed in the shelf, so I need to cut a slot deep enough to receive it. The better way to do this would be to use a router, set up a jig, and route out the bottom of the shelf. But I just work out of my garage, and the router is all packed up in the back somewhere, and the table saw was out and ready. So I set up some stop blocks and then ran the shelf repeatedly through the table saw. When I got tired of that, I switched to the chisel and knocked out the cuts and tried to smooth out the bottom of the shelf. It still looks very jagged, but honestly I don't care so much about what the underside unseen parts of the project are going to look like. The purpose here is just to create a slot to receive that USB hub, and in the end, this worked just fine. Those jagged parts you see there filed out pretty easily. For the doubled up edge, I'm setting the table saw at a 40-degree bevel, cutting some strips, mitering those, and then gluing them onto the bottom of the shelf. This will not only give the shelf a little bit of a beefier look, but it'll help hide the electronics that I'm going to attach to the bottom. The bed this shelf is going to go next to is stained wood, and ideally I would have liked to have stained this shelf to match it. But in my experience, pine is very difficult to stain. It can come out blotchy and very inconsistent. You have to deal with the end grain. Not to mention you got to find a matching stain to begin with. I did not have high hopes that that would work, and it did not work. So instead I just primed it and went with a paint that matches the trim color in that room. I'm securing the USB hub into the slot in a couple of different ways. The first is with some caulk to eliminate any wobbling. Also, if the hub fails at some point, it wouldn't be impossible to remove and replace. And I'm also caulking around the face to help it blend in. Maybe it's for the best that the stain didn't work out. If it did, I wouldn't have had a great way to deal with the gap between the hub and the wood. Most USB hubs I saw had the cord coming out of the side rather than the back like this one, which wouldn't work for my design. So I will link in the description this particular USB hub. And then behind it, I'm mounting some clips so that when you push a USB connector into it, it will resist sliding backwards under the shelf. I have a short extension cord. I want to mount one end under the shelf as well. This is going to hold the base for the USB plug, and on the other side, a base for an alarm clock. I found these pretty cool zip tie bases. I didn't even know they existed, but you can double stick tape them to a surface or screw them down as I'm doing here. And then you just slide a zip tie through and pull it tight. And the last thing I'm adding is some staples around the USB hub cord. I wanted to give it a little more resistance for when you're pulling cords out of the hub. For mounting to the wall, I have a long French cleat that I bought for another project and didn't end up using, so I'm cutting it to length and using it here. Given the shelf placement, I could only hit one stud, and that was on the right, so on the left I'm using a wall anchor. This extension cord has a swivel plug which lets me angle the cord directly up to the shelf. So here we are at the end. Just plug in the USB and we are... Just kidding. After I got it up, I started to worry about heat dissipation from the USB hub. So I took the whole thing down and cut some of the wood away and exposed more of the aluminum housing. It might have been okay. It could still dissipate through the front and the back, but on the other hand, I didn't want to win any Darwin Awards. The good news is, when I said earlier that using caulk would let me get the hub out, that turned out to be true. Using a flat blade between the hub and the wood, I was able to cut through all the caulk and pull the hub back out. If you're building something like this, it probably makes sense to think about heat dissipation a little earlier in the project than I did.